Hi Math, I'm Andy. Sometimes math class pretty much boils down to just formulas. And two of the most common formulas that get used are the distance formula and the Pythagorean theorem. A lot of times people don't remember the distance formula, so we'll just remind you. The distance formula is the distance between any 2 points on the coordinate plane is y2 minus y1 squared plus x2 minus x1 squared, and you take the square root of that whole thing. Now the Pythagorean theorem, that's something that even people that aren't good at math, they don't remember math class, they've been out of high school for 30 years, they still remember this a squared plus b squared equals c squared, whether they know what it stands for or not. Maybe because it simply has a, b, and c, but really the Pythagorean theorem is referring to a right triangle, and it's saying that if one side has a length of a, one side has a length of b, and we call this the hypotenuse, and it has a length of c, then there's a relationship between the values of the lengths of these sides, and it's that their squares being added of the legs are equal to the hypotenuse. Now, the distance formula, just getting back to that. Again, what I said was to measure any two points on a coordinate plane. So let's say there's a point here and there's a point here, and I want to know how far away are these points using a straight line. Well, remember, coordinates come in ordered pairs. And because the ordered pairs represent the letters x and y, we want to be able to tell these two x's and y's apart. So what we end up doing is we reference one of the points as a 1, so we'll call that x1 and y1, and we reference the other point as a 2. x2 and y2, and that's only so we can tell the difference of this x and that y and that y. So those little 1s and 2s just help us tell the difference. Now let's kind of take a look at these 2 points and measuring this distance. If we don't have a ruler or a measuring tool, what we can do is we can say, well, I know that x's go from here to here. So if I just figure out how far it is from here to here, that'll tell me that x horizontal distance. And one way that we can do that is we can say, well, if I know this x, x2, and I know this x, x1, if I subtract those values, that'll tell me that distance. And now it works the same for the y's. This y point is up here, and this y point is down here. And if I want to find this distance, what I can do is I can take that y value from the top and take away the y value from the bottom. And so did you notice that I essentially just drew a right triangle? My right triangle looks like this, and I say that the length of this side is that value x2 minus x1, and the length of this side is that y2 minus y1, and this is essentially the distance that I'm trying to figure out. And so if we look at this distance formula, we can set this triangle up using our Pythagorean theorem, where a and b are now going to be substituted as these values. So let's say that a, because just to keep it line, this is the vertical side, let's use the a as the y2 minus y1. So this would say that the a squared is now going to be y2 minus y1 squared. My Pythagorean theorem has plus b squared. B we'll say is this length, which is x2 minus x1 squared. And the c squared, well, we'll call that the d squared. Now let's say I'm solving for d. Well, in order to get rid of a square, I need to use the inverse, which is a radical square root. So I'm going to square root both sides of my equation. And I end up with the square root of y2 minus y1 squared plus x2 minus x1 squared is equal, the radical and the square cancel, is equal to d. And so it turns out that this distance formula is secretly the Pythagorean theorem, just using specific points.